Why was it important to shed blood for forgiveness when scripture says that there is no forgiveness without the shedding of blood? But then the bones of Jesus was not broken. Why was it important that his bones were not broken? In scripture we read that when Adam was created, Adam from Adamah, meaning red soil, and Adam meaning first blood. This is important because now when Adam was created, God then breathed life into Adam, into his nostrils, which also says neshama. The word neshama is used. Now many of you will know the prayer, the old Shema in Deuteronomy, which says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength or might. What is meant by that, right? Now, heart, we know that we need to give our heart to God. The soul, meaning nefesh, and then strength, meaning me'od, which actually just means plentiful and a lot. Now, also means the very core of something. It is now important to know that red blood cells also carries the very oxygen that you breathe. Now, when God breathed life into the nostrils of Adam, it also meant that the breath of God now circulates within Adam. And this brings us back to the bones. You see, in the bones, the red blood cells are born. The very red blood cell that carries the oxygen through your life, your heart, your brain, and everything that needs oxygen. This we also read in Leviticus 17, where it says, life of the flesh is in the blood. And this we know that it explains the same idea when it says life in the blood. Now, because the same word is used, neshama, which also gives us the meaning strength, which is then the same as shema, and nefesh, which is the soul. Now, there is where we get our core being from, is in the bones. When Jacob was dying, his bones were carried all around. People carried his bones to all the ends of the earth. When Jesus had to be on the cross, his bones were not broken. And this is the reason why, because his strength is in his structure. The very essence of life is born in the bones. There is also a beautiful example in Psalm 139 when it says, I was weaved together and my frame was not hidden from you. The very frame where life exists, but the very breath that comes from God that is carried around the frame. This is important to know that when Jesus was hanging on the cross, his bones were not broken. The very frame stayed intact, which is also the very essence of him. But his breath is something that he released by himself when he said, take my breath. And later on, we see that he breathed his spirit upon them. So why is the relation to a tree so important? You see, when Adam saw Eve for the first time, he said, flesh of my flesh and bone of my bone, which is important because this relates to the scripture that we read in Isaiah 11, where we see that a branch shoots from the roots of Jesse. Now this is important because a tree, etzem, is also the same as a bone, etz. Now why? Because we read when we see Eve was created as a helper, which means etzer kanebu, and the same etzem is talked about. From the roots of Jesse, we see this with the etzer kanebu, with Eve, which is the helper. And how does this relate, right? Because etzer kanebu speaks about a tree planted, meaning resistance that pushes up the branch from the roots. Now, the same with Jesus. When Jesus ascended to heaven, his branch went up to the heavens, but his roots, which is the helper that is resisting, is still on the earth, still in the soil. Then we also understand the scripture that says planted by the river. Now Jesus, giving the life, giving the water, is the life, and the river that flows out of him is for the roots that stayed behind. Now, where does it all come together, right? That his bones should not be broken, but his blood was shed for forgiveness, and his breath was released to God, but his spirit is also breathed upon us. You see, we are the branches that comes from the Messiah, Jesus, who is the river that the roots is planted by, that is the main tree that grows to the heavens, that ascended to God and sits on the right hand of the Father. So what am I trying to say? Is that life that exists in the blood, that carries the breath of God, Neshama, which also speaks of Shema, love the Lord your God with all your heart and strength, the strength of a tree that grows from its roots, is that Jesus gave up his breath, gave up his life through his blood, and through that we have the strength to grow in the roots, on earth, in the water, the living water, him shooting up as a tree to the heavens. This kind of resistance, which is the Etzer Kenebu, which means that we push up the Messiah's gospel, the message of God through the world, as the roots growing down into the soil, but him as the branch that shots up from the roots of Jesse. You see, the message in it all is that the bones were not broken because the Messiah still grows, but the blood was shed, the life was given for us to have the everlasting life.